David Markson has written a critical study of Malcolm Lowry. He is a poet, a novelist, and a mystery writer. For most of his writing life, he has lived and written in the village, which has changed, but in a sense never changed. He looks so at home, he often gets stopped in the street and asked directions, which is fitting, I'd say. Like T.S. Eliot, like John Ashbery, Markson alludes, rearranges, creates his new form of the novel. William Kennedy has called David a singular writer who crafted his own genre, one of fragmented history, shaped as a wily narrative of the life force confronting high art, wisdom, folly, and solitary decline. He's got a sly sense of humor and a keen sense of what belongs where in order to be seen or heard anew. Writing these books has been an effort to save things. Writers will have to look back at Markson's quartet as they write forward. Please welcome David Markson.
I'm going to read, is that working properly? I'm going to read the concluding pages of my, the bright lights are so bright, of my last novel, which is called The Last Novel. But it needs a preface. I just have notes here, nothing to read word by word. But as a few of you know, the few of you who have read it, I see my royalty statements, the few of you. My books have no dramatic scenes, no incidents, no events, no sections that stand alone. There aren't even any chapters. It just starts at the beginning and goes on to the end. And 98.5%, that's not really a guess. I think I counted. 98.5% of the book is composed of a sequence of intellectual odds and ends about writers, about painters, about composers, about performers, even sports figures. Oddly enough, the section I'm going to read has a little more sports than usual. It's not typical. That just happened to fall here. There are certain themes that run through, of course, mainly about the life of the writer or the artist, and death is a major theme. But you'll see that when I'm reading. Because this is discontinuous, and each of these incidents, each of these items is separate from the one before. When I write them, I put a line space, a blank line between them. It makes it easier to read. Also, it's not a hodgepodge. These things are really carefully arranged and interconnected. I think I used the phrase connective syntax in the book. Something mentioned in the beginning, maybe on page 3, will be picked up on again 80 pages later, or maybe 3 pages from the end of the book. In fact, I had a lovely review in the Sunday Times a few months ago, a rarity in my life, by the writer Catherine Texier, and she said the book is put together like a long poem. And I was just thrilled that she used that phrase, because that's the way I think of it as. But I've said that's... I can't get used to these lights because I don't want to stare down. I said 98.5% of the book is composed of these small items. There's another 1.5%, of course, to be accounted for, and that deals with my one character, who in this book is called a novelist, not the novelist, just novelist. These things are threaded through references to him. And that's really what my experiment is with these recent books, to see how little I need, how much I can get away with how little, or how little I can get away with, how little I can get away with. That's what I'm trying to say. In fact, that will even be mentioned here several times in this book. Reference is made to novelists' personal genre, and one of them, and when I make those references, it's kind of metafictional, and I speak of some of the things I'm trying to do, and one of them will even talk about that experiment, keeping him off stage. But I also have to give you a few very specific details about, just briefly, but a few things that happen, because otherwise the end of the book will make no sense. In the very first paragraph, actually 2 paragraphs, the second one is only 4 words, but I announce that there are 6 stories in novelist's apartment building. Then I say, in addition, the paved inner courtyard is at basement level, making 7. New paragraph, it then says, and then the roof. Then there are about 3 items, line spaces separating them. I think about Michelangelo, Toscanini, I forget the other one, Balzac maybe. Then there is a paragraph containing only 5 words, 5 one-word sentences. It says, old, tired, sick, alone, broke. If you don't realize right away that that is referring to novelist, you will very shortly. Other things will be said. But then in the middle of the book, or a little before the middle, I quote Robert Louis Stevenson at one point, saying that if you intend to make a book end badly, you have to make it end badly from the beginning. After which I say, such as mentioning an 8th-story roof in its very first paragraphs. In fact, then I follow that by saying, this may, I forget how it's phrased, but this may call to mind Chekhov's admonition that if there's a pistol on stage in Act 1, it had damn well better be fired by the last act. I think a couple of other items follow, and then it says again, old, tired, sick, alone, broke. And a few pages later, there's one more reference. It says that actually the door to novelist's roof is connected to an alarm, and once in a while somebody trips it, a workman or somebody, and nobody pays any attention. Now this is pretty blatant as I've read it. You all now know what's going to happen at the end of this novel. But it isn't that obvious when you're reading. These are only 5 or 6 small paragraphs out of 2,000, roughly. And in fact, I had another major review in a major periodical, and the fellow, he loved the book, and he made it obvious that he missed this entirely, which startled me. Anyway, 2 last things. I'll be starting at random. As I say, it's all a continuity. And in fact, I realized just today that the very first sentence, I just picked open to a page which is as far from the end as I thought would be reasonable. And the very first sentence isn't even a sentence, but you'll fall into it within a minute or 2. It's not a beginning, however. It doesn't say once upon a time. The only other thing I want to say is I realized, looking through this a few times, I'm making an excuse for myself, but without any narrative flow and continuity here, and with every paragraph, or almost every one, different from the one before, some are dramatic, some are sad, some are even occasionally witticisms or jokes. Sometimes they are unattributed quotes, sometimes they are attributed quotes. But the tone changes repeatedly, and it's pretty difficult, I found, to read it out loud. So I am probably going to occasionally stumble. I hope it's only occasionally. Richard Burton, I am not, but I will do my best. Anyway, I just need a sip. Oh, my name is even on it. I am not used to reading standing up, and I will not break the spine of this book. They taught me that in the 3rd grade. But there's a shadow on it. I don't know what to do. The final entry, Ray Franz Hall's, dated September 1, 1666, in the records of the Harlem Paupers Fund, listing 4 florins for a gravedigger. An immense nausea of billboards Baudelaire spoke of a century and a half ago. Closing time in the gardens of the West, Cyril Connolly called it, a century after that. What can be the sufficient reason for this phenomenon? Said Pangloss. It is the last day, cried Candide. A man may know that he is going to die, but he can never know that he is dead, said Samuel Butler. Death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death, said Wittgenstein. Versailles, Edith Wharton was buried in. January 8th, 1713, Arcangelo Corelli died on. Blake's bust in Westminster Abbey by Jacob Epstein. Epstein is a great sculptor. I wish he would wash, said Ezra Pound. The mirror will not be looked into until you have returned, says a letter from the wife of an ancient Chinese poet. Incapacitated by Alzheimer's disease, Willem de Kooning was once discovered about to spike his coffee with weed killer, presumably thinking it whiskey. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, the only book that ever took him out of bed 2 hours sooner than he wished to be, Samuel Johnson said. Chloroform in print, Mark Twain called the Book of Mormon. Think of the Bible and Homer. Think of Shakespeare and think of me. Unquote, Gertrude Stein. Oh dear, reportedly having been David Garrick's dying words. Eddie Grant, the pre-World War I third baseman who graduated from Harvard and who insisted on shouting, "I have it," instead of "I got it," when chasing a fly ball. And who, as an infantry captain, would be killed by machine gun fire in the Argonne Forest. Baseball is what we were. Football is what we have become, said Mary McGrory. Far too much music finishes far too long after the end, judged Stravinsky. Still to be read in the blank spaces on some of Raphael's preliminary sketches for his Vatican stanza frescoes, drafts of love poems to his latest mistress. Will Durant's amusingly unworldly conclusion that the Sappho in Raphael's Parnassus is, quote, too beautiful to be a lesbian. Hark, hark, the lark, and Who is Sylvia, which Schubert set on the same single afternoon. The word plagiarism, from the Latin for kidnapping, to kidnap another writer's brains, Marshall had it. Old horse, old Pete, old reliable, old folks, old aches and pains. Novelist's personal genre, in which part of the experiment is to continue keeping him off stage to the greatest extent possible, while still compelling the attentive reader to perhaps catch his breath when things achieve an ending nonetheless. Conclusions are the weak point of most authors, George Eliot said. If you know what you're doing, you don't get intercepted, said Johnny Unitas. Eugene Sue, most of whose widely read novels dealt with the poor and downtrodden, and thereby made him a millionaire, Kierkegaard noted. Picasso, in Paris during the Nazi occupation, and learning that someone had accused him of having Jewish blood. I wish I had. Drawing for an artist, a way of thinking, Valerie termed it. February 23rd, 1931, Nellie Melba died on. "Let me alone. Good day," said Tom Paine to the two clergymen who had contrived to make their way to his bedside when he lay dying. "'Tis their will that thy son from this crested wall of Troy be dashed to death." The most tragic of the poets, Aristotle called Euripides. Proust's excessively lavish over-tipping. Gide's reputation as a cheapskate. Coryate, the English traveler in Venice in 1611. "When I went to the theater, I observed certain things I never saw before, for I saw women act," reminding one that Ophelia, Juliet, Rosalind, Cleopatra, Lady Macbeth were all written to be portrayed by adolescent boys. Until 1660, when one Margaret Hughes broke the English barrier as Desdemona. Typhus or his syphilis caused Beethoven's deafness? ? A rejection of all that civilization has done, said the London Times of a first post-impressionist exhibition in 1910, which included Cézanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin, Matisse, Picasso, others. "Just an old queen," Auden spoke of himself as, while also referring to Miss God. "One never steps twice into the same Auden," Randall Jarrell said. Seneca's Thyestes, in which Thyestes unknowingly eats the flesh of his own children and is described as belching contentedly. Twickenham, Alexander Pope was buried in. Wondering how on earth one remembers that when St. John of the Cross escaped after his near death by starvation in a Toledo prison, the first meal he was given at a discalced Carmelite convent was of pears simmered with cinnamon. "A good man, but he did not know how to paint," said El Greco of Michelangelo. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., at 87, seen turning to gaze after an attractive girl. Oh, to be 70 again. The pain of rereading Twelfth Night after far too many years and coming upon the end of the clown's song in Act 2, Scene 3. "Then come kiss me, sweet and 20. Youth's a stuff will not endure." "Old age is not for sissies," said Betty Davis. "Tell me honestly, Cal, am I as good a poet as Shelley?" asked William Carlos Williams, not long before his death, of Robert Lowell. Freud, born in 1856, being asked in 1936 how he felt. How a man of 80 feels is not a topic for conversation. Shaw, at 94, being asked the same. At my age, one is either well or dead. Leukemia, Ernestine Schumann Henke died of. "He was greater than we thought," said Degas at the funeral of Manet. Apollinaire, who was severely wounded in World War I, and then died of influenza 2 days before the armistice. December 8th, 1918, Corporal David Markson died on. "Human life is everywhere a state in which much is to be endured and little to be enjoyed," declares a line in Rasselas. Samoa, Robert Louis Stevenson died in. The Marquesas, Gauguin. Tchaikovsky, Glinka, Borodin, Mussorgsky, all buried in the same St. Petersburg cemetery. Diogenes, asking to be buried face downward, because the world will soon enough be turned upside down. Late February or early March 1945, Anne Frank. What seest thou else in the dark backward and abysm of time? His powers of mind have almost entirely left him. His late paintings are miserable. It is really a lamentable thing that a man should outlive his faculties, said Samuel Morse after a visit with an elderly John Singleton Copley. You don't always make an out. Sometimes the picture gets you out, said Karl Yastrzemski. It's plain water. In the long run, we are all dead, noted Kynes. Chiridas, what is it like down there? All darkness. And resurrection? All a lie, quoth Callimachus. Minor authors who lived men knew not how, and died obscure, men marked not when, Roger Ascham takes notice of. Those rare intellects who, not only without reward, but in miserable poverty, brought forth their works, Vasari likewise commemorates. One must go on working, and one must have patience, Rodin told Rilke. My time will come, said Gregor Mendel, ignored throughout his life. On Van Gogh's bier at Auvers-sur-Oise, clusters of golden sunflowers, brought by Dr. Gachet. The report that Osip Mandelstam spent the last hours before his death in Siberia reading Petrarch by firelight. Verdi's funeral, which according to his own wishes was conducted without music. Verdi's. Though in fact he asked that the score of his Te Deum, one of the four sacred pieces, be placed in his coffin. Regensburg, Johannes Kepler was buried in. Where there, long unknown. My old paintings no longer interest me. I'm much more curious about those I haven't done yet, said Picasso at 79. King Arthur is not deed, but shall come again. That's written in the antique English. I'm cold, Snowden said. I'm cold. For sundry doctrinal reasons, the Archbishop of Paris refused to sanction a Catholic burial for Colette. Conversely, France itself granted her a state funeral, making her the first woman ever so honored. Give me your arm, old toad, help me down Cemetery Road. I have often thought of death, but now it is never out of mind, said Swift in his late 60s, a decade before it actually occurred. You can tell from my handwriting that I am in the 24th hour. Not a single thought is born in me that does not have death graven within, wrote Michelangelo at 81, himself with 8 years remaining. The long littleness of life, Francis Cornford speaks of. As he reclined at table, there arose a question, what sort of death was best? At which he immediately, before anyone could speak, said, a sudden one, says Dryden's Plutarch, Res Caesar. Philosophy ought really to be written only as a poetic composition, Wittgenstein once suggested. Merde pour la poésie, decided Rimbaud. Timor mortis conturbat me, being William Dunbar, the fear of death distresses me. Memento mori. Any man, if he is all alone, becomes more aware of being lonely as he ages, said Eliot. Nothing is more evident than that the decays of age must terminate in death. Yet there is no man, says Tully, who does not believe that he may yet live another year, Johnson is somewhere reminded. The last act is tragic, however happy all the rest of the play, perceives Pascal. Lorenzo da Ponte's memoirs, in which Mozart is practically never mentioned. I've no more sight, no hand, nor pen, nor inkwell. I lack everything. All I still possess is will, said Goya, nearing 80. With an ink too thick, with foul pens, with bad sight, in gloomy weather, under a dim lamp, I have composed these pages. Do not scold me for it. Appended Telemon to the score of some light soprano airs, written at 81. Time rushes by, love rushes by, life rushes by, but the red shoes dance on. What happens in the end? Oh, in the end she dies. 25 years after his death, Poe's remains were disinterred from what had been little better than a pauper's grave and reburied more formally. Walt Whitman, who made the journey from Camden to Baltimore in spite of being disabled from a recent stroke, was the only literary figure to appear at the ceremonies. Oh, that it were possible we might but hold some 2 days' conference with the dead, laments Webster's Duchess. Celan's recollection that his mother had never had white hair. Oh, damn it, I left out a line. I'm sorry, somewhere. Paul Celan, that is, recollection that his mother had never had white hair because of having been murdered in a concentration camp while still too young. Cézanne, who lived in greater and greater isolation late in life. Degas, who lived in greater and greater isolation late in life. 100 cares, a tithe of troubles, and is there one who understands me? Dein goldenes Haar, Marguerite, dein aschenes Haar, Sulamith. In addition to his name and date on the frame of a portrait by Jan van Eyck, als ich kann, the best I can do. Time hath, my lord, a wallet at his back wherein he puts alms for oblivion. Saint Gildas the Wise of Wales, who asked that at his death he be placed in a small boat and set adrift at sea. Sophocles, a tremor in his hand, as recorded by Aristotle. He said he could not help it. He would happily rather not be 90 years old. It is later than you know, printed Baudelaire onto the face of his clock, after having broken off its hands. There is always more time than you anticipate, said Malcolm Lowry, for whom there wasn't. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving, but drowning. Yisgadal v'yiskadash shemei rabo. I too have written some good books, said Nietzsche, overhearing someone's reference to literature in a fleeting moment's lucidity during his final madness. Having died, they are not dead, wrote Simonides of the Spartans slain at Plataea. Keats, in a last letter some weeks before the end, telling a friend it is difficult to say goodbye. I always made an awkward bow. Tiny drops of water will hollow out a rock, Lucretius wrote. Als ich kann, which novelist finds himself several times repeating, even while not even sure in what language. Is it 600-year-old Flemish? And uncertain as to why he is caught up by Van Eyck's use of it. That's it? I can do no more? All I have left? I can go no further? Als ich kann. Mankind, which began in a cave and behind a windbreak, will end in the diseased-soaked ruins of a slum, said H.G. Wells. The world began without man, and it will end without him, said Levi Strauss. Swiftly the years beyond recall, solemn the stillness of this spring morning, reads the Arthur Waley translation of a Chinese fragment. Excuse me. Not much more. One man is born, another dies, being Euripides. After death, nothing is, being Seneca. The old man who will not laugh is a fool, said Santayana. When Grandpa dies and his ashes are dropped into the ocean, may I have just a little bit of them to put into something nice so I can keep Grandpa with me for all time? Pulvis et umbra sumus, quoth Horace. We are but dust and a shadow. I'm sorry. Dispraised, infirm, unfriended age, Sophocles calls it. Unregarded age in corners thrown, Shakespeare echoes. The worn copy of Donne's verses, inked throughout with notes in Coleridge's handwriting, and at the rear, I shall die soon, my dear Charles Lamb, and then you will not be sorry that I bescribbled your book. I am weary, Ananda, and wish to lie down. Bhartrhari, fully 1,400 years ago, bemoaning the poverty of poets in Sanskrit. Then come kiss me, sweet and 20. Youth's stuff will not endure. Be patient now, my soul. Thou hast endured worse than this, Odysseus once says. Mais où sont les neiges d'antan? Is it true then what they say, that we become stars in the sky when we die? Asks someone in Aristophanes. Access to roof for emergency only. Alarm will sound if door opened. Old, tired, sick, alone, broke. The old man who will not laugh is a fool. Als ich kann. Thank you. Thank you.